Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Hey, welcome back to Daily Dose Radio. Today I'm so glad to announce that Daily Dose Radio Volume 1 received the coveted Stuttgartensia Award for Green Bible Studies podcast on the Internet. So come on in, sit down. This is good, clean, green, artisanal, organic Bible study, and it's made just for you. Today we're reading in Psalm 7. We're in the second half of the psalm, and we're going to be looking at verses 15 and 16 today. And now yesterday we started basically the second half of the second section, or the second half of Psalm 7. I've divided it in two parts, 10 through 13 and 14 through 16. 17 really is a kind of a postscript. It's a nice epilogue to our Psalm 7, a great concluding verse. But we started the second part, which is verse 14. We treated all of verse 14, and you'll recall that I referred to James chapter 1. We're going to go back to James chapter 1 today and look at that one more time. Let me just read that for you before we go on and read our passage. James 1, verse 13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust, and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. Now we're going to look at today this idea of sin bringing forth death. So let me read verses 15 and 16. He hollowed out a pit and excavated it, and so is fallen into the pit that he made. His trouble is returned upon his own head, and upon his crown has his violence come down. Now, we talked about the falsehood being born yesterday. There's the contact, the writhing, the trouble is conceived. Falsehood is born into the world, and then that falsehood, what does it do? Well, it leads the wicked into something horrible. He hollowed out a pit and excavated it. Now, that pit was not meant for him. Who is that pit meant for? That pit is trouble, and that pit is trouble personified because it's meant for the righteous man. It's meant for the person who's following the Lord. You see, falsehood and trouble will never leave their neighbor righteousness and holiness alone. Never. They always try to trap them. They always try to destroy them, to discredit them in some way. And so the wicked man conceives trouble, gives birth to falsehood, and then we see him outside in the night digging a pit and excavating it. That is, getting it all cleaned out, making sure it's deep enough, laying over the top of it, the false floor so that the person they're trying to catch will fall through and into the pit. But notice what happens. So is fallen into the pit that he made. Now, that pit that he made was for someone else, but he's fallen. Notice verse 16. His trouble, there's trouble again. We had trouble in verse 14. It was conceived by the wicked man. Now that trouble has returned, but it's returned on his head. And verse 16, part 2, his crown. Upon his crown, that is his head, his pate, the top of his head. All his violence has come down. So he's fallen into the pit. Trouble is returned. On his crown, his violence has fallen. So there's death. You see, this is the result. This is the end game. So once sin is conceived, it now gives birth to and conceives and brings to pass the trouble that the wicked man thought would be for somebody else, but really it's for himself. And so we see the arrows hotly pursuing the wicked. The wicked man needs to take note of this and repent of his sin and turn to God, because if God is angry with the wicked every day, the wicked needs to turn from that wicked way and call on the Lord before he falls into the pit that he's dug. Join me again tomorrow, and we'll look at verse 17 on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.